Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, where we visit with leaders who are shaping, innovating, and disrupting technical education. People who are not afraid to think differently, not afraid to try something new, all with the goal of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. The CHIPS and Science Act of 2022 was enacted by the U.S. Congress earlier this year and signed into law by President Biden in August of 2022. Huge implications for the semiconductor industry, for technology in general, and important to us here on the Tech Ed Podcast, huge implications for education and STEM education, to be specific, at every level: K-12, technical college, community college, universities, research, and so on. So here to talk all about the act today on the Tech Ed Podcast is that legislation's co-sponsor in the United States Senate. And he comes to us in the form of Senator Todd Young from the great state of Indiana. Senator, thanks so much for joining us.
Matt, thanks for having me.
So let's start with the CHIPS Act itself, the CHIPS and Science Act. It's a bill that has gone by many names. It's gone by the Endless Frontier Act. It's gone by the United States Innovation and Competition Act, all of which you co-sponsored in the United States Senate. So what are the key aspects of CHIPS?
Well, Matt, there are really three pillars to the legislation. One is investment in the technologies that we and so many others believe will shape our economic future and also our future national security environment. The second pillar is investing in some tech hubs around the country to plant the seed corn for economic growth and innovation in the future across America's heartland, really. And then the third pillar involves incentives to bring our semiconductor fabricators back to America's shores, knowing that we just went through a global pandemic and there are looming risks to many of the countries that currently host semiconductor fabrication, military risks. Think of Taiwan and the threat that China presents. So we need to have our own semiconductor fabrication capabilities, and we need incentives, just as other countries are offering them, to bring that manufacturing back home.
Absolutely, bring it back home. One of the things that I've become accustomed to talking about is, the pandemic, Senator, so very difficult for so many people the last several years. But for those of us that worked in manufacturing, I was 23 years in Midwest manufacturing. As you know, we had a plant in Indiana, not too far from where you live and raise your family, and a huge advocate for manufacturing across America. If there's one silver lining in my mind of the pandemic, it's that the rest of America now realizes what a lot of us in manufacturing and in technology knew all along. And that is the fundamental value that the U.S. supply chain plays in our overall economy. When we could get what we wanted, when we wanted it, at a price that we were willing to pay for it, kind of easy to take supply chain and manufacturing for granted. And now that we no longer have that reality, at least in the short term, it really calls into play and brings to the surface the importance of industries like the semiconductor industry. I want to get into that technology and the aspects of the legislation in a little more detail. But before we do that, one of the things that was most interesting to me, Senator, is that you co-sponsored this legislation in the U.S. Senate alongside Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. I'll be honest with you, those are not names that we often see on the same side of the same issue. And so it was really fascinating to me to see that level and spirit of bipartisanship, not just in the co-sponsorship, but in the overwhelming support for the bill in the U.S. Congress. How did you and Senator Schumer come together on this bill?
Well, right. Matt, you're absolutely right. It's sort of a Felix and Oscar relationship. I'll let you choose who's Felix and who's Oscar. But, like for me, a number of good ideas up here, it was hatched in the Senate gym during my morning workout. Senator Schumer and I have gotten to know one another fairly casually in that setting. We'll talk baseball and some other topics. But I also came to learn that Senator Schumer has this hawkish streak with respect to China, and he's really concerned about how their major investments, multi-trillion-dollar investments in core areas of technology like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, hypersonics, which I'll say again, have not just economic implications, but national security implications, because these are the tech areas that will help us fight and win wars in the future. So he and I both recognize the need for the United States of America to up our game in these areas through more research investment and create an environment where private companies can take the research findings out of our universities and Department of Energy labs and create new dynamic economies that will not just serve our security interests, but also private economic interests. So it started with the research funding. We also recognize the vulnerabilities in our economy to future disruptions of our semiconductor supply chain. So we saw the need relatedly to invest in that in concert with the other investments.
All of them very, very important. We'll talk a little bit more about semiconductors here in a minute. And perhaps a related question, I love your background. I understand that that you grew up providing janitorial services to your family's business, which is awesome. You sit on several committees in the United States Senate, but among them the Committee on Science and Transportation, and also that of small business and entrepreneurship. So I think a lot of us can see, large companies like Intel, for example, on the semiconductor side, how the legislation and investment may benefit a company like that. But let's speak for a moment on kind of the small to mid-sized businesses here in the United States. How does this legislation affect them?
Well, in multiple ways. Some of them direct, Matt, others indirect. It's going to be our small entrepreneurs, innovators, and investors who will have new opportunities to play an exciting role in our economy as we plant the seeds of those companies through research investments in our universities. I mean, the findings that spin out of our university laboratories and come from the best minds who work at those universities will no doubt bring venture capitalists into the university environment. They'll figure out what sort of things might be the stuff of commercial uses, and then the venture capitalists will partner with the entrepreneurs, and new businesses will be created in places like Wisconsin, where you are, or Indiana, and that's really exciting for those of us who have oftentimes wrung our hands at the venture capital fixation seemingly on California and New York and Massachusetts, but they've overlooked much of the talent we've had. So as I like to say, this will give the small business people and mid-sized business people of the heartland an opportunity to really suit up, not just to improve their material circumstances of their communities and their families, but also to help our economy prevail, our military succeed, and ultimately ensure that our values win this great competition in the 21st century against the Chinese Communist Party. I guess there's another sort of value proposition I would offer, and it's a little maybe more accessible and less lofty to some people, but I think it's great, which is when these chip manufacturers locate $20 billion investment in Ohio recently. Intel, we just had Skywater announce a $1.8 billion investment in Indiana. I mean, there are going to be a lot of these multi-billion-dollar investments. Well, who's going to provide the HVAC equipment to these new fabs? Well, it might be a business like my dad's business used to be. They supply that sort of material. So there's all sorts of second and third order effects, and not only will we have 750 jobs created in West Lafayette, Indiana, from a new fab, you'll have thousands of jobs, they're created indirectly from the wealth that's generated.
Absolutely. We talk about backward linkages and forward linkages in manufacturing, the backward ones being that, companies like Intel, as an example, and I was a supplier to companies like that for a long time in manufacturing. People forget that for every Intel, there's another 500 small to mid-sized companies that are supplying them in so many ways. In our case, it was contract manufacturing, but the backward linkages, these companies buy insurance, they're educating their employees and their employees' children. And then we have the forward linkages, right? So all of those employees that, by the way, in the world of manufacturing make significantly more than the average non-farm payroll job here in the United States, those individuals aren't just keeping that money, they're spending it as well, right? So they're spending it forward in so many different areas.
Circulating it around the economy, paying for haircuts and landscaping services and all the things that, frankly, aren't high tech but are essential. Those non-tradable services. So all boats will rise when you start to see this sort of economic activity generated.
A rising tide indeed lifts all ships, and it lifts it into really interesting technologies as well. You know, Senator, we were at the International Manufacturing Technology Show broadcasting live on YouTube earlier this year. 24 sessions we did at that trade show, largest industrial trade show in the Western Hemisphere. And all of our guests were talking about just these incredible new technologies that are coming into not just manufacturing, but really around the world and around the globe in every sector and every space in our economy. You've mentioned a couple of them already: artificial intelligence, quantum computing, certainly semiconductors, 6G advanced technology and advanced communication. We're talking a lot about 5G, but 6G is not far behind it. Nanotechnology, advanced energy. So as you and Senator Schumer initially, and as the Congress in general, looked at emerging technologies, how did you decide on which ones were important and which ones we needed to focus on?
A lot of cross-cutting efforts. So we read a lot. My members of my staff read quite a bit. We drew on previous studies from the Department of Commerce, our Department of Defense. I, of course, had a lot of conversations with technologists, business leaders, and former national security top officials alike. And frankly, we also looked to see what our adversaries are investing in. And there was a remarkable, and I guess to be expected, overlap between their areas of investment and what we believed the United States should be investing in. So we tried to narrow the scope of and take risk out of these strategic bets by doing everything we could to really think through what technologies were going to shape the future and what were needed from our warfighters. Of course, you know, in the end, you were admittedly making some strategic bets here. Some may go more right than others, but when you're making these collective investments on behalf of the whole people, as opposed to firm-generated or customer-generated demand for investments, it's the nature of things. Same thing our military has been doing for years as they consider which ships to invest in, for example.
Absolutely. You know, as we just recently, the last couple of weeks, we had former space shuttle astronaut Don Thomas on with us on the Tech Ed podcast, and really talking about, in that sense, all of the benefits that investment in NASA and space exploration have in the overall economy. It strikes me that this is kind of the same thing, right? Is that even if we're close on these technologies, the research that we're going to talk about here in a minute, the education, the investments in new plants, new infrastructure, and so on to support these technologies are going to have waves throughout the economy. And it sounds like you're seeing it exactly the same way.
That's right. And we perceive there to be such outsized opportunities from these federal investments that you can afford to have a couple of areas not take off, knowing that you're going to make up for it in other tech areas within your portfolio. So, and history bears this out. This is what federally funded innovation accomplishes, are these outsized investments in some areas.
You know, if you think about kind of the generation or two that came behind us, the times we're living in now, in many cases, they really haven't had to live through or think about. A lot of them, came of age after the Cold War and during a time of relative peace and tranquility, really around the globe. And as we've seen over the course of the last year, we don't necessarily live in that world anymore. What with what's going on in Ukraine and with Russia, and you mentioned already the risk in Taiwan and what China's goals are in that particular part of the world. So I want to focus a little bit more deeply on the whole national security aspect of chips. You've touched on it a couple times already, but how specifically will the bill affect and improve our national security position?
Well, it's going to be essential. I mean, the key technology areas of the future are artificial intelligence, which will be essential to discern what is happening in a complicated military environment, and whoever can assay what is happening and determine what steps, based on your algorithms, need to be taken. should win on the battlefield. Of course, all of that requires a high level of computer processing power, which the field of quantum computing can help with. Moreover, there are certain secrets that will need to be kept, both commercial and national security, as we head more deeply into the 21st century. All of that is dependent upon having very high processing power with your computers so that the enemy can't break your codes. That too is quantum computing. Hypersonic weaponry, it can outmaneuver our surface-to-air radar systems, which are designed to detect intercontinental ballistic missiles carrying nuclear weapons so that they can evade those defenses. So really, we have not yet come up with the sort of weapons and defense technology that are required to hopefully avoid, but if necessary, to fight and win these sorts of battles. In fact, to me, it's pretty sobering that the Chinese and the Russians have been outpacing us as it relates to hypersonic technology. So we have enough time. We have enough time to make up lost ground. We have enough time to stay ahead in most of these technology areas. And these investments will be directly made through our universities and DOE labs, and to a lesser extent, but importantly, at the Department of Defense. Of course, all these findings will then be utilized by our defense establishment, the intelligence agencies, military, Department of Commerce, to keep us safe and secure and protect our very way of life. I guess one last thing I'd really like to emphasize, Matt, is we've created mechanisms in this legislation to crowd in foreign talent and treasure so that our closest allies can also help us develop these technologies, work with us to come up with the best breakthroughs and ensure we stay in the driver's seat moving forward. And we've importantly clamped down on research security at the university level so that the Chinese in particular don't steal all of our intellectual property.
Well, you certainly speak eloquently about the whole issue of national security yourself, and a graduate of Annapolis, right, of the Naval Academy.
Graduate of Annapolis, and then 5 years active duties in the Marine Corps. I was an intelligence officer working with drones, autonomous vehicles of all things, another area of technology in which we are investing. And then as I got out, I spent a little time in recruiting. So spent some time thinking about talent management and talent acquisition.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is a huge topic for us here at the Tech Ed Podcast, though, the whole idea of not just talent management and building talent, but also in terms of how we create that next generation of STEM talent for technical careers, the types of careers in the companies that we're actually talking about today. And I want to turn our discussion to that topic at this point in time. Senator, in our audience, as you can imagine, includes a lot of our nation's top technical educators, whether that's a K-12 teacher in a STEM school or in a technical education program, an instructor, an administrator, a leader at a technical or community college. It could be a university provost or chancellor doing both undergraduate or research. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. Will the Act better position us to deliver learning at those levels of education as well? And if so, how?
Well, it will, and we not only want to bring everyone along, it's essential that our country is firing in all cylinders to ensure that our economy grows to the maximum extent possible, that we're identifying all the breakthroughs we can and making them in the United States wherever possible. It's frankly, it's essential to our civic fabric that everyone feels like they're part of this grand project in democracy and in capitalism. And so we enable this through the legislation, through a major investment in everything from the associate's level to postdoctoral level. As my governor, I think, said with a memorable phrase recently, from GED to PhD, we want all people to be able to participate in this dynamic tech economy.
Governor Eric Holcomb, is that right?
That's right. That's right.
Actually had an opportunity to meet him about 2 years ago at the state capitol in Indiana. So that's very, very well put. And so we talk about the GED end. So folks that are just leaving high school, maybe going direct to workforce, maybe going to a community or technical college. Talk a little bit more about the other end of that spectrum, Senator, the research spectrum, how important that aspect is, and then how the legislation will affect university research.
Well, most people who pursue PhDs aren't primarily and they're not predominantly pursuing that field of study because they're chasing a buck, right? They're curious people and they have a thirst for knowledge and they would like to make some breakthroughs in their scientific areas of inquiry and specialization. So the notion that they can get more grant funding and they won't be toiling in the wilderness without pursuing meaningful projects for them is really enticing. So that's one thing that will be a pull factor. But we also offer a bit of an incentive in actual PhD funding in some of these discrete areas. Those who want to pursue quantum physics, which leads to breakthroughs in quantum mechanics. In quantum computing, for example, there will be some additional funding offered for those individuals. And for those of an entrepreneurial bent that would like to work outside of a university setting, they're going to be needed in some of these high growth potential, high technology companies that we would like to be started. So we provide some funding to ensure that those companies will have the resources to mature early technologies and get them over what we call the valley of death. And we also provide some workforce incentives to those high growth potential companies. So we're really trying to create an accommodating environment so that more people enter the field, more findings spin out of the university and Department of Energy and DoD laboratory environment. And then we have more high growth potential companies that are started and survive, into year 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Plenty of reason for optimism thanks to the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022. Indiana Senator Todd Young is our guest on the Tech Ed podcast. Senator, we're going to close with one final question for you. It's a question that we love to ask our guests here on the Tech Ed podcast. Really, really good insights that we get week in and week out. And that is, if you had one piece of advice for a high school sophomore, what would that advice be?
Frankly, it's the same advice I give to my own children. I have high school kids and some in middle school and frankly, even a lot of adults and younger kids as well. It's find something you're passionate about. It can be a STEM field. It can frankly be anything, and then find a way to serve others. It'll bring a lot of meaning to your own life. It, of course, benefits others. And I think you can't go wrong. You're going to lead a life of purpose and contribute to all of our progress if you sort of follow that lodestar of service paired with whatever your work is.
Find something you're passionate about, find a way to serve. Senator Todd Young has certainly found a way to do that in so many ways, and especially recently through your leadership on the CHIPS and Science Act, which is going to have such a positive impact on our overall economy, on technological advancement here in the United States, and on STEM and technical education. Thank you so much for being with us.
Matt, thanks for having me. This has been great.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave a review, and if you like this episode, share it with a friend. New episodes launch every Tuesday, so listen in next week.